In this tutorial, we are going to learn how to enter MIDI notes using the step input method. Using step input is a lot like using a word processor. We're not going to play the music in real time, we're just going to enter each note value and the sequencer will play it back at whatever speed we want. For example, if I wanted to write Joe went to the store, I don't have to write it that fast. I can type it slowly. Now I can read that Joe went to the store. I didn't have to type it at that speed to know how fast it should go. I see where there's letters and spaces and I know when to wait, when to make sound. Same thing is true when you're using the step entry method. This is the step input window, and you can see there's different note values you can enter. It also talks about entering rests and different velocities. We'll get to that in a few minutes. First off, let's see how this window functions relating to the timeline and the edit window. Basically, when you press a key on the keyboard, a note of the value selected will be entered into a track. Where this note happens depends on your edit selection. So right now I'm going to turn this control off, which is the link, timeline, and edit selection. And as you can see, I can highlight the timeline separate from an edit point. If I zoom in, you'll see that the timeline selection is here and the edit selection is this little yellow line with dots here. I can increase the edit selection if I want and have two different selections. The step input window places a note at the beginning of the edit selection on the destination track. So I'll just enter a note now. See, it happens right where my edit selection was, not my timeline selection. So if I change my timeline selection, it doesn't change where this note comes in. It always follows the edit selection. If I have those two linked, then they're one and the same. So I can select a region here. My edit selection begins along with my timeline selection. I play a note and it goes in that spot. Okay, so that's how you locate where your events will be placed in the track. Now let's look at the step input window in detail. To find that window, we go to Event, Event Operations, Step Input. At the top, it'll say the operation is step input. We probably want it enabled. And it will tell us a destination track. This is like the track that's record enabled. You can choose a rhythm value for how long each note will be. You choose the starting place for the note by what you've selected in the edit selection. There's also tuplet, which you can change these values slightly. Note length means the duration, so you can make a note take up a certain amount of space but not sound that entire space. You can also have the notes set to a static velocity, or you can have it take the velocity you play on the keyboard. Finally, at the bottom, there's a place to add a length of time in silence. That would be next step, or to undo steps that you've already put in. Okay, so I'm first off going to make a timeline selection here, and I'm going to use the MIDI editor window and the event list window so we can see these values more clearly in piano roll style and as an actual MIDI event. So first off, I make a selection. Let's say I'm going to select measure 1 beat 2 as my starting place, and I have half notes selected here and the destination track is drums. So when I click on the piano keyboard, I should get a note that lasts for 2 beats long beginning at measure 1 beat 2. And there it is. We see it down here, piano roll style, and if you look up in the event list, you see there's a note starts on measure 1 beat 2. This is the note number and it lasts for 2 beats. We also got a note on velocity of 64. So let's see how this changes. Let's say I choose the 8th note, which is 1/2 of a beat, and I choose as my velocities a low value, like 36. Notice that my edit selection is at measure 1 beat 4. This note is 1/2 of a beat long, so if I press 1, we should see a note that's 1/2 of a beat long. And there it is, 1/2 of a beat. if we look at our event list, we see starting on measure 1, beat 4, this note on velocity of 36, 480 parts per quarter note, which is half of a beat. So I could continue doing that, and we continue to get notes. You can see how they look in the event list and in the piano roll editor. Alright, if I wanted to add some silences of the same duration, I would just hit next step. So I'll do that now. Next step moves ahead 1/8 note, or 1/2 of a beat. I could move ahead 1/2 of a beat, and so forth. So the next step basically takes this note value and moves the edit cursor ahead by that value. The last thing I'd like to look at in this window is the note length. Basically, if you change this value, you change the length of the note, but the playback cursor will move ahead by that note value. So for instance, if I chose a half note of value, but I choose only 25% for the note length, we'll get a note that is the length of an eighth note. In other words, it sounds for 1/2 of a beat, that's a quarter of the half note, but the playback cursor will move ahead 2 beats, which is the full value of a half note. Okay, so I'm going to make this clearer by choosing to start right on measure 3. My increment value is half notes, so the edit cursor will move ahead 2 beats. Doesn't matter what I select, just matters where it starts. But the length of the sound will only be an eighth note, or 1/2 of a beat. Let's try this. And there it is. You saw the cursor jump ahead quite a bit, but the duration of the note is short. I'll do one more of those. Maybe I'll even use a shorter value. How about 10%? Press that note again. The note is very short, but the playback cursor jumped ahead quite a bit. Now let's use the step input window to transcribe some music. I have one rhythmic example here with some different dynamics, loud and soft. And I have a keyboard example where we can do some chords and durations. Okay, let's start with the rhythmic example. Make sure that my drums are showing in the event list. We've got the piano roll here. So I'll go to event operations, step input. I want to check to make sure that my edit cursor is at the first measure. It's always good to check the counter to help with that. And now, just like typing in a word processor, I'll just enter each note or rest. So my first event, let's put this on drums. First event is a quarter note, and it says forte, which means loud. So I'm going to give it a pretty high velocity. And I should put this note length back to 100%. Alright, so I'll play my first note. Then I have a quarter note's worth of rest, so I'll do next step with quarter note selected. I have 2 quarter notes. Then I have a new dynamic, piano, which is quiet, so I'm going to make this low. And it looks like it's 8th note, so I'll select the 8th note, half of a beat, press 2, silence, next step, then my next 8th note, next 8th note, then I have 2 16th notes. So I'm going to click onto the 16th note. These are also loud, so I'm going to change my velocity and hit my notes again. 16th, 16th, next step, 16th rest, 16th, hit my 8th note for the last 8th note, and the last bar, 8th note. Okay, so there's my pattern. Here's what it looks like in the event list. Notice that the values, here's the loud velocities, soft velocities. First notes were a quarter note in length, then 8th note in length. Here's my 2 16th notes, 240 parts per quarter note. Let's hear the whole thing, see if it sounds like it looks. Sounds exactly the way it looks on the page. Let's do another example where we use the change in note length value but not the change in step increment value to quickly record an example of chords with long notes and short notes. I have an example here with some quarter note chords, and in the second bar these chords also fall on the quarter note beat, but they have a short duration and silence after. I've written it another way with tenuto lines, which means long, and staccato dots, which means short. Okay, so I start by pulling up my editors. I'm going to choose piano here. I'm going to make sure that the piano editor is the one that's right enabled. And definitely for my step input, I want to choose piano. Okay, I'm going to leave enable off for a second to make sure I'm getting the right sound. Still getting the drum sound, so I'm going to check my mixing board, see what's record enabled. If I record enable the piano, now we're getting everything correctly. Okay, so I'm ready to play. So I'll enable this, make sure my edit cursor is at bar 1. In the first 4 notes I want a quarter note value, so I'm going to leave quarter note and I'm going to leave the note length at 100%. Here we go. For the next measure, I want the notes to still fall on every quarter note beat, but be a short length. So I'm going to put 25% and play the same thing again. I don't have to do any extra next step or any of that. It'll take care of it. And you can see those short note values up there. Do the same thing for the next bar. And the last bar. Alright, so I've basically transcribed this just as it is written. Let's hear what it sounds like. And finally, how it looks in the edit window as a clip with some scrolling.